My name is Francis Frell. I am 32 years old, and exactly 2 hours ago I signed a stack of papers that may destroy the only thing my father ever truly loved. He does not know yet. Right now, my father is standing in front of a mirror inside his house on Maple Lane, adjusting his tie and rehearsing a speech written in thick black ink on a yellow legal pad. 25 relatives are gathered around a long dining table covered with white linen, polished silverware, crystal glasses, and the expensive candles Diane bought specifically for tonight. Everyone thinks this evening is going to be beautiful. A celebration, a happy family memory, but I already know what my father plans to say. And the moment I read those words 4 days ago, something inside me finally broke. That is why I drove to Attorney Martin Cope's office this afternoon. That is why I sat across from a silent notary with trembling hands. That is why my signature now sits at the bottom of 3 legal documents that will change my father's life forever. But the speech itself is not the worst part. The worst part is what arrives 9 days from now. A white envelope, a legal notice, a 90-day deadline, and a choice my father will not be able to undo. When I was 8 years old, my father drove me to a construction site just outside Ridgewood County. It was early Saturday morning. Fog still hung over the empty lots, and the grass sparkled with dew under the rising sun. My father's pickup truck bounced over gravel while classic rock played softly through the speakers. Back then I worshipped him. Rick Frell, owner of Frell & Sons Construction, the man everyone in town respected. The man who could walk onto a muddy job site and somehow make chaos organize itself around him. To me, he was larger than life. He parked near the skeleton of a half-finished house and lifted me out of the truck bed like I weighed nothing. "Come here, Franny," he said. He placed me on a stack of plywood and pointed toward a thick steel beam stretching across the open ceiling. "You see that beam?" I nodded. "That's what holds everything up. Without it, the whole house collapses." He rested a rough hand on my shoulder. "One day, that's gonna be you." I believed him. Children always believe the people they love. At the time, it was just me, my father, and my grandfather Harold. My mother had died the year before, ovarian cancer, 34 years old, too young to leave behind a 7-year-old daughter who still slept with stuffed animals and waited every evening for bedtime stories. After she died, the house became quieter. Not peaceful quiet, lonely quiet, the kind where footsteps echoed too loudly. My father buried himself in work, but my grandfather stepped in. Harold Frell was the real foundation of the family. Most people thought my father built Frell & Sons Construction. He didn't. Harold did. Harold started as a carpenter at 19. By 30, he was managing crews. By 40, he owned contracts across 3 counties. He understood people better than blueprints. He remembered birthdays. He attended every school play. He always kept butterscotch candies in the top drawer of his cedar desk. Every Sunday after church, he brought me into his study. The room smelled like cedar wood, coffee, and old paper. There was a brass lamp on the desk and a heavy glass paperweight shaped like a bear. Harold would sit me on his lap and let me stamp invoices with the company seal. I loved the sound it made. Thunk, thunk, thunk. One afternoon when I was 9, he paused while sorting receipts and looked down at me seriously. "Francis," he said quietly. I looked up. "Never let anyone make you feel small in your own family." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. At 9 years old, family still felt permanent, safe. I thought families stayed together automatically. I didn't know people could slowly erase you while still smiling at your face. Everything changed when Diane Mitchell entered our lives. I was 18, 2 weeks away from leaving for college. My father met her at a dentist's office on Oak Street. She was warm, attentive, beautiful in the polished, careful way that made everyone immediately trust her. She laughed at all my father's jokes, brought casseroles to the house, touched his arm when he spoke. After years of grief and loneliness, my father looked alive again. And honestly, at first I was happy for him. I truly was. Diane had a daughter named Megan, 8 years old, blonde curls, big eyes. Shy smile. The first time we met, Megan hid behind Diane's leg while clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Say hi to Francis," Diane encouraged. Megan whispered hello. I smiled and waved. At that moment, I genuinely thought maybe this could work. Maybe we could become one of those blended families people post about online. Maybe loneliness was finally ending for all of us. I was wrong. Diane's kindness had boundaries. It extended generously toward my father, toward Megan, toward neighbors, toward church friends, but never fully toward me. At first, the changes were small enough to ignore. "Francis, honey," Diane said one afternoon after the wedding, "Megan really needs her own creative space. Would you mind moving some of your old things into the guest room?" 3 months later, my bedroom became Megan's craft room. My posters disappeared. My books were boxed up. Butterfly stickers covered the walls. Then the photographs changed. The framed wedding picture of my parents vanished from the mantel. In its place appeared a new family photo from the county fair. My father, Diane, Megan, and me, except I was standing at the far edge of the frame, half a step behind everyone else. By Christmas, a different portrait replaced it entirely. Professional studio lighting, matching blue sweaters, my father. Diane, Megan, know me. I found out about the photo when I came home from college for winter break. Nobody mentioned they'd taken family portraits. Nobody noticed me staring at the wall. Diane simply smiled and said, "Oh, isn't it lovely?" Megan was so excited. My father said nothing. That became a pattern. Diane would act, my father would stay silent. And silence can wound people deeper than cruelty. I wanted to become a structural engineer. Ever since that construction site morning, ever since my father pointed toward that beam and told me I would hold things together, I worked hard, straight A's, scholarships, advanced math. Physics competitions. When college acceptance letters arrived, I got into state engineering with partial scholarship support. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope trembling in my hands. I got in, I told my father. He looked proud. For a moment, then Diane spoke. "Engineering is very expensive," she said carefully. My father rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe teaching would be better, Franny. Stable hours, benefits." I stared at him. "Do you not want me to go?" "That's not what I'm saying." But it was. No financial help came, not a dollar. I filled out scholarship applications until 2 in the morning, worked nights at a copy center. Lived on ramen noodles and cafeteria coffee. Graduated with $37,000 in student loans. My father attended the ceremony. He sat in the 5th row beside Diane and Megan. Megan spent most of graduation playing games on Diane's phone. Afterward, my father hugged me briefly. "Proud of you, Franny," he said. Then Diane reminded him they had dinner reservations. They left before the reception started. I stood there in my cap and gown watching families take pictures together while mine walked toward the parking lot without me. Phone calls became shorter after college. At first, my father still called every Sunday. Then every other Sunday, then once a month. Conversations lasted 6 or 7 minutes before Diane interrupted. "We're heading out. Megan needs help with homework. The show's starting." Every year, I felt myself fading further from the center of the family, like an old photograph slowly losing color. Thanksgiving invitations came late. Christmas plans changed without warning. Sometimes nobody told me anything at all. Once I drove 45 minutes home for Easter only to find the house empty. They had gone to Diane's sister's lake cabin. My father apologized 3 days later. "Saw your text late, Franny." I sat in my parked car outside that empty house for nearly an hour before driving back to my apartment. I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking, if someone loves you, shouldn't remembering you be easy? Then Harold died. Tuesday morning, heart attack, 79 years old. They found him sitting at his cedar desk with reading glasses still perched on his nose. Half-finished coffee beside the brass lamp. The funeral filled First Baptist Church completely. Over 200 people attended. Contractors, former employees, neighbors, old friends. Everyone had a Harold story. How he loaned money quietly. How he fixed roofs for widows after storms. How he remembered every employee's child by name. Diane complained about the seating arrangement. "I just think immediate family should sit in front," she whispered sharply. She meant herself, and Megan, not me. Aunt Patris physically moved me into the front pew beside my father. She didn't say anything. She simply took my arm and guided me there. After the funeral, Harold's attorney approached me. Martin Cope, quiet man, brown suit, wire-rimmed glasses. "Francis," he said softly, "your grandfather left instructions for you." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Your father is a good man with a weak spine. This is your seat at the table. Do not surrender it." At 24 years old, I didn't yet understand how important those words would become. But I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my coat pocket. And somewhere deep inside me, something shifted, because for the first time in years, someone in my family saw exactly what was happening. A week later, Martin explained the rest. Harold had quietly placed 40% of Frell and Sons construction into a trust under my name. The shares would officially transfer to me on my 30th birthday. My father knew the trust existed, but not the details, not the clauses, not the protections Harold built into the agreement. At the time, 6 years felt impossibly far away. I thanked Martin, stored the documents, and tried to move on with my life. I built a career, designed bridges, parking structures, medical buildings. I paid off my loans, bought a small condo, learned how to survive without expecting much from anyone. But every holiday, every forgotten invitation, every missing seat at the table added another hairline fracture inside me. And stress fractures matter. Engineers know this. Structures rarely collapse from one catastrophic event. Most failures happen slowly. tiny weaknesses, repeated pressure, neglected damage, until one day the entire system gives way all at once. On my 30th birthday, I drove to Martin Cope's office. Rain hammered the windshield the entire drive. Martin slid the official operating agreement across his desk. 43 pages, legal language, signatures, corporate filings. Then he tapped one section specifically. Clause 7. 3, he said. I read it once. Then again. Voluntary relinquishment by any member triggers mandatory buyback at independently appraised fair market value. Remaining members must complete buyback within 90 calendar days or forfeit operational control to a court-appointed trustee. I looked up slowly. What does that mean exactly? Martin leaned back. It means your grandfather built protection into the company in case you were ever pushed out. I stared at the paper. If you ever choose to leave the company, Martin continued, the remaining owners must buy your shares at full value. If they cannot afford it within 90 days, the business enters court-supervised restructuring. I sat very still. Traffic moved outside the office windows. Somewhere downstairs a car horn echoed through the street. Did my father read this? I asked. Martin gave a sad smile. Your grandfather noted that Richard signed without reading past page 4. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because it hurt. Even Harold knew. Even Harold understood exactly who my father was, a man capable of love, but incapable of standing against the people who shaped him. I signed the transfer paperwork. 40% officially became mine. Legally, irrevocably, and still I tried. For 2 more years I tried. I emailed my father asking for meetings. No response. I requested financial reviews. Ignored. I mailed certified letters asking to discuss my role in the company. Silence. When I finally reached Diane directly, she sighed into the phone like I was inconveniencing her. Francis, why are you creating tension? Your father's finally happy. I'm trying to participate in the business. You barely come around. Nobody invites me around. Long pause, then the line disconnected. That was the moment I realized something devastating. They weren't forgetting me. Forgetting is accidental. This was deliberate, and deliberate exclusion leaves fingerprints everywhere. Then came the text. Wednesday afternoon, directly from my father. Father's Day dinner. Sunday, 6 p.m. Be there. 3 sentences, that was all, but it mattered because he had sent it himself. Not Diane, not through Megan, not relayed through somebody else. For the first time in over a year, my father contacted me directly. I stared at the message for nearly 5 minutes, then I called Aunt Patris. He's planning something, she told me. What kind of something? Diane's been organizing all week. Fancy table settings, professional photographer. Matching centerpieces, a photographer, yes, something cold settled in my stomach. A feeling engineers get before a structural test fails. Not certainty, but instinct. The quiet understanding that pressure has exceeded tolerance. That something underneath is already cracking. That evening, after sitting alone at my kitchen table eating microwaved pasta, I picked up my phone and called Martin. If I ever chose to exercise clause 7.3, I began carefully. Martin didn't interrupt. How quickly could paperwork be prepared? Silence, then, by tomorrow afternoon. I closed my eyes. I'm not saying I'll sign. I understand, but prepare it anyway. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a very long time, because deep down, I already knew. The beam was cracking, and Sunday was going to decide whether the structure survived, or collapsed completely. Thursday arrived grey and humid, the kind of summer morning where the air feels heavy before rain. I barely slept the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing my father standing at the head of that dinner table smiling, while everyone applauded around him. I still did not know exactly what he planned to announce, but somewhere inside me, I already knew I was not included in it. At noon, I drove to Martin Cope's office. His building sat on Caldwell Street above an insurance agency and an old bookstore that smelled like dust and yellowed pages. Martin greeted me quietly and slid a manila folder across the desk. These are the preliminary documents, he said. I opened the folder slowly. 3 forms, 3 signatures, 3 decisions that could financially cripple my father. Voluntary relinquishment, mandatory appraisal request. Formal notification to remaining LLC members. The words looked clinical, emotionless. Legal language never reflects the actual damage underneath it. A contract can destroy a family using perfect grammar. You don't have to sign today, Martin reminded me. I know. You still hoping things change? I stared down at the papers. Yes, because despite everything, despite 14 years of exclusion, despite the silence, despite the missing invitations and forgotten birthdays and carefully edited family photos, part of me was still 8 years old standing on plywood beside my father. Still waiting for him to look at me and say, "There you are, I've been looking for you." I closed the folder. "Not today," I said. Martin nodded. "I'll keep everything ready." Friday afternoon, Aunt Patris asked if I could help set up for the Father's Day dinner. I almost said no, but Patris rarely asked anyone for help, and she was the only person in the family who still consistently called me. So I drove to the house on Maple Lane, the same house where my mother once planted roses along the fence, the same house where I used to sit on the kitchen counter eating pancake batter while Harold argued with my father about baseball. The same house that no longer felt like mine. Cars lined the driveway. Diane was already in full event planning mode. String lights stretched across the backyard. Fresh flowers covered the dining room table. Candles, gold napkin rings. Handwritten name cards. It looked less like Father's Day and more like a wedding reception. Francis, perfect timing, Diane called brightly when I walked in. Her smile looked polished, carefully manufactured. There are folding chairs in the garage. Of course there were. I carried chairs, moved tables, hung decorations. Nobody asked how I was. Nobody offered me water. Megan floated around the house laughing with two friends while Diane directed everyone like a stage manager preparing opening night. At one point I walked into the dining room and saw the seating arrangement already finished. 25 place cards, my father at the head, Diane on one side, Megan on the other. My seat sat at the far end of the table beside cousin Derek and an empty chair. The distance between my chair and my father's felt symbolic, like someone had measured exactly how far away I belonged. I stared at the arrangement for several seconds, then I saw it, a gold frame sitting on the kitchen counter. Elegant, expensive, empty, but inside the frame was a temporary white insert card, certificate of adoption. State of North Carolina. My chest tightened. I heard Megan laughing from the living room. "Oh my God, I know," she said excitedly into her phone. "It's finally official." Next to the frame sat a courthouse envelope. In the matter of adult adoption, I stopped breathing for a moment, not because my father wanted to adopt Megan. That alone wouldn't have broken me. What broke me was the realization that this entire dinner had been carefully orchestrated. A public declaration, a performance, a moment designed for applause, and somehow nobody thought I deserved a warning. I quietly set down the last folding chair, grabbed my keys, and left. Nobody stopped me. The drive home took 45 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't answer my phone. I drove in complete silence while memories replayed themselves like old film reels. My father teaching Megan to drive. My father attending Megan's school recital. My father missing my engineering awards ceremony because Diane scheduled a weekend trip. My father forgetting to call on my birthday 3 years in a row. Tiny moments, tiny exclusions. Tiny cuts. People think heartbreak arrives all at once. It doesn't. Real heartbreak happens gradually, quietly, like water damage inside walls. You don't notice the destruction until the structure starts collapsing. Saturday morning, I drove to Aunt Patris's house. She lived in a small yellow ranch home on Birch Lane. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon. Patris always cooked when she was worried. That morning she had made cinnamon rolls. We sat together at her table while sunlight spilled across the countertops. After several minutes of silence, she disappeared down the hallway and returned holding a framed photograph, a professional studio portrait. My father, Diane. Megan, matching clothes, matching smiles, know me. When was this taken? I asked quietly. March. I stared at the picture. 3 people standing close together, a complete family, no empty space, no missing person. No sign I had ever existed there at all. I asked your father about it, Patris said carefully. What did he say? He said you didn't like family photos. I laughed once. A sharp sound, not amusement, pain. I never said that. I know. Patris reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Francis, what are you going to do? I looked out the window. A neighbor was watering flowers across the street. Normal life, ordinary morning. Meanwhile, my own family was preparing a celebration centered around replacing me. I don't know yet, I lied, because by then I did know. The paperwork was waiting. The signatures were ready. The clock had already started ticking inside my head. I just needed one reason not to go through with it. One sign my father still saw me. 2 weeks before Father's Day, cousin Nathan hosted a barbecue. I hadn't planned on going, but Nathan specifically texted me, "You should come," so I did. Kids ran through sprinklers. Music played from Bluetooth speakers. The smell of grilled burgers drifted through the backyard. I entered through the side gate carrying a bag of chips, and immediately heard Megan speaking. "It's gonna be official," she announced proudly. 3 cousins stood around her. "Dad's adopting me legally." Someone said something too quietly for me to hear, then Megan laughed. I mean, Francis was never really part of this family anyway. I stopped walking. The world seemed to pause. Megan looked directly at me, saw me standing there, and continued anyway. "She barely comes around. She doesn't even work for the business." Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. Cousin Claire stared at the grass. Nathan looked horrified. I slowly placed the untouched paper plate in my hands onto the picnic table, then I turned around and walked out. Behind me, 30 seconds later, I heard Nathan finally say, "Megan, that was out of line." And Megan answered, "What?" She knows it's true. I sat inside my car gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. She knows it's true. That sentence echoed louder than anything else, because the terrifying part was this. Somewhere deep down, I had started believing it too. That night I called Martin. "What time can I come in Friday?" He didn't ask questions. 2 o'clock. Tuesday morning, 4 days before the Father's Day dinner, I drove to Frell & Sons Construction. The office sat on Industrial Drive beside the equipment yard. Same faded company sign, same gravel lot, same smell of sawdust and diesel. I still handled quarterly paperwork connected to my shares in the company. It was the only reason I ever visited anymore. The receptionist was at lunch. My father's office door stood open. I stepped inside and froze. The gold adoption certificate sat framed on his desk, signed, ready. Beside it sat a yellow legal pad, my father's handwriting, a speech draft. I should have walked away. I know that now, but I read it. Every word. Family means everything to me. Today I'm making something official. Megan Elizabeth Mitchell has brought joy, purpose, and light into my life. I finally have the daughter I always deserved. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. My throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. The daughter I always deserved. I stood in that office staring at the legal pad, while 14 years of memories rearranged themselves into one terrible truth. My father had not simply neglected me, he had replaced me. And now he planned to announce it publicly. I slowly placed the paperwork I'd brought onto the counter. Then I walked out of the office, past the break room, past the employees loading equipment, past trucks carrying our family name across the doors, Frell & Sons, except by then I already understood something. There were no daughters in that name, not anymore. I sat in my car for 11 minutes before I could start the engine. Wednesday evening, I ate cold soup alone in my condo while a home renovation show played silently on television. I barely tasted anything. My mind kept replaying the yellow legal pad, the daughter I always deserved, finally. As though I had been some temporary inconvenience, a failed draft, a structural defect, I picked up my phone and called Martin. "The documents," I said quietly. "Are they ready?" "Yes." "If I sign Friday, can you hold filing temporarily?" "Yes, 48 hours. And if I change my mind, I shred everything." I stared at the muted television. A smiling couple hugged over kitchen tile samples. Normal problems, normal love. Meanwhile, I was trying to decide whether to financially dismantle my father's company because he publicly erased me from his life. "Friday at 2, I said. After hanging up, I sat in darkness for a long time, because despite everything, I still wanted to be wrong. I still wanted Sunday to arrive and somehow prove that I mattered. One sentence, one acknowledgement. One moment where my father looked at me the way he used to. That was all it would take. One genuine moment. And I would destroy the paperwork. I truly would have. But deep down, another part of me already understood the truth. Some structures cannot be repaired once the foundation starts rejecting its own weight. And Sunday was coming. Friday arrived hotter than usual. By noon, the entire town felt wrapped in humidity. Clouds hung low over Ridgewood County like a storm waiting for permission. At 1:42 p.m., I parked outside Martin Cope's office and sat in my car staring at the steering wheel. I still had time to leave. Time to drive away. Time to pretend none of this was happening. But pretending had become the defining skill of my family. Pretending I wasn't excluded. Pretending silence wasn't rejection. Pretending absence wasn't abandonment. Pretending the empty chair at every table didn't mean anything. I was tired of pretending. At exactly 2 p.m., I walked into Martin's office. The same quiet waiting room. The same beige walls, the same ticking clock. A notary sat beside the conference table, short grey hair, reading glasses hanging from a silver chain. She offered a polite nod but no conversation. Maybe she sensed this wasn't paperwork. This was grief wearing legal clothing. Martin opened the blue folder. "Once signed," he said carefully, "the documents remain reversible for 48 hours. After Monday morning, the filing becomes official." I nodded. My hands felt cold, not shaky, just numb. Like some emotional circuit inside me had finally overloaded. Martin slid the first page toward me. Voluntary relinquishment of ownership interest. 40%. My grandfather's shares. My seat at the table. I stared at the signature line. Then suddenly, without warning, I remembered my father teaching me to ride a bike. I was 6. He ran behind me down Maple Lane shouting, "Keep pedaling, Franny, don't look down." I remembered falling. Scraping my knee, him carrying me home. At some point during the past 14 years, I stopped being his daughter, but once upon a time I had been. That memory nearly broke me. I almost stood up, almost walked away. Then another memory followed. The family portrait without me, the unopened invitations, the empty chair, the daughter I always deserved. I picked up the pen and signed one document, then the second, then the third. Each signature felt strangely calm, not explosive, not dramatic, just final. When I finished, Martin carefully placed the documents back into the folder. The company's current estimated valuation places your 40% at approximately $320,000, he said quietly. I nodded once. If the remaining members cannot complete the buyout within 90 days, operational control transfers under court supervision. I understood, so did he. My father had spent years slowly pushing me away from the family. Now the operating agreement was going to push back. You can still cancel before Sunday afternoon, Martin reminded me. I stood, thank you. But as I walked toward the door, I already knew something important. I wasn't signing because of anger anymore. I was signing because I finally understood my value. And people who understand their value stop begging for invitations. Sunday morning arrived quietly. I woke before sunrise. For several minutes I simply stared at the ceiling. The 48-hour window was still open. One phone call could erase everything. One sentence. That was all my father needed to give me. One genuine sentence proving I still mattered. I showered slowly, opened my closet, and stood there for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, I chose a simple navy blue dress, Harold's favorite color. I put on my mother's gold sapphire earrings. Aunt Patris had saved them after the funeral. Tiny blue stones, elegant, timeless. The last thing my mother ever bought for herself. I looked at myself in the mirror, 32 years old, structural engineer, homeowner, independent, successful, and somehow still emotionally starving for approval from a man who barely saw me anymore. I hated that truth, but honesty matters, especially when pain is involved. At noon, Aunt Patris called. You don't have to go, she said softly. Yes, I answered after a pause. I do, because some endings require witnesses. By 5:52 p.m., Maple Lane was overflowing with parked cars. The house glowed with warm yellow light. Laughter drifted through the windows. I sat inside my car watching silhouettes move behind curtains. A family gathering, a celebration, an execution. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothed the front of my dress, touched my mother's earrings, then stepped out. The porch smelled like cut grass and citronella candles. Inside, 25 people filled the house. Voices overlapped, dishes clinked. Someone laughed loudly near the kitchen. Diane greeted me first. Oh, Francis, she said brightly. You came. The sentence sounded almost surprised. She air-kissed near my cheek without actually touching me. Her perfume smelled like vanilla, sweet enough to become suffocating. I looked around for my father. He stood near the fireplace beside Megan. He glanced toward me briefly. Hey, Franny. Then immediately returned to whatever Megan was showing him on her phone. That was it. No hug, no conversation. No acknowledgement that his biological daughter had just walked into the room. I found my seat at the far end of the table, exactly where it had been during setup. Cousin Derek on one side, an empty chair on the other. Aunt Patris quietly sat beside me after a few minutes. Under the table, she squeezed my hand. Neither of us spoke. At 7:15 p.m., my father tapped his wine glass with a fork. The room slowly quieted. Diane dimmed the lights. Candles flickered across the table. Then I noticed something near the fireplace, a wooden easel, and resting on it, the framed adoption certificate. Gold edges catching candlelight. Beautiful, prominent, intentional. Beside it stood a photographer holding a professional camera. Not a casual dinner, a staged memory, a performance designed for applause. Diane caught me staring at the easel, and smiled, not politely, not nervously, triumphantly. The smile of someone who already believed the story was finished. My father stood at the head of the table, straightened his tie, lifted his wine glass. Family means everything to me, he began. The room softened immediately. People smiled. Several relatives leaned closer. My father loved an audience. When I lost my first wife, he continued, I thought happiness was over for me. He looked at Diane. She pressed her hand dramatically against her chest. Then Diane came into my life. Pause, and Megan, he smiled toward her. My little Megan brought joy back into this house. Megan began crying immediately. The photographer lifted her camera. Flash, flash, flash. For 4 full minutes my father spoke. About Diane, about Megan, about rebuilding family, about second chances, about love. He said Megan's name 11 times. He never said mine once, not my daughter's, not my children. Not even a passing acknowledgement. I sat less than 15 feet away from him, and he spoke as though I did not exist. That hurt more than I expected, because even after everything, some pathetic hopeful part of me had still believed he might remember. My father reached behind his chair and lifted the framed certificate. The room collectively inhaled. Today, he announced proudly, I'm making something official. He turned toward Megan. Megan Elizabeth Mitchell, I am legally adopting you as my daughter. The room exploded. Applause, cheers, crying. Diane covered her mouth dramatically. Megan threw her arms around my father. Camera flashes burst across the room. Then my father smiled through tears and said the sentence that finally destroyed whatever remained between us. I finally have the daughter I always deserved. The applause grew louder. People stood. Someone shouted congratulations. And at the far end of the table, I disappeared. Not physically, emotionally, completely. Nobody looked at me. Nobody considered what those words meant, because in that moment I wasn't part of the story anymore. I was background, furniture. The empty chair at the edge of the frame. Aunt Patris grabbed my forearm tightly. Francis, I'm okay, I said automatically, but I wasn't, and we both knew it. For the next 45 minutes, the entire house revolved around my father and Megan. People lined up for hugs, more photographs, more speeches. Diane floated through the room glowing with victory. At one point, Cousin Claire quietly sat beside me. Are you okay? She whispered. I almost laughed. Instead, I answered. Thank you for asking, because she was the only person who did. Dinner continued. Roast chicken, green beans, boxed mashed potatoes pretending to be homemade. I ate mechanically, slowly, carefully, giving my hands something to do besides shake. Then Diane approached my chair during dessert. She sat beside me with that same carefully polished smile. Francis, she said softly, I hope you understand this isn't about you. I looked directly into her eyes. And for the first time in years, I truly understood her, because she was right. It had never been about me. That was the problem. I smiled politely. I understand completely, Diane. She patted my arm like I was a child, then walked away. During dessert, I quietly excused myself and walked down the hallway toward Harold's study. The room was dark except for faint porch light through the window. The cedar desk still stood exactly where it always had. Same brass lamp, same glassware paperweight, same smell of wood and dust. I opened the top drawer, and there it was, the original operating agreement, 43 pages. Harold's handwritten notes still visible in blue ink. I flipped directly to Clause 7, 3, voluntary relinquishment, mandatory buyback, 90-day deadline. In the margin beside the clause, Harold had written, RF signed without reading, keep this safe. I stared at those words for a very long time. Then I whispered into the empty room, I tried, Grandpa. Outside the study, laughter echoed through the hallway. The photographer's camera flashed again. Celebration, joy, family. I carefully placed the agreement back into the drawer, closed it gently, and returned to the dining room, because engineers understand something important. You don't abandon a structure before confirming where the damage truly is. And by then, I finally knew. The damage wasn't temporary, it was foundational. 3 weeks after the family meeting, Ridgewood County knew everything, not officially. Not through newspapers or court records, through whispers, through grocery store conversations, through church parking lots and hardware store aisles where people lowered their voices the second someone from the Frell family walked past. In small towns, news does not travel. It leaks, slowly, through cracks in people. Some people said I destroyed my father. Some said my father destroyed himself. Most people stayed quiet because they had watched pieces of this happen for years and never said anything. The first installment payment arrived on a Thursday morning, a certified envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000. No note, no apology, no letter from my father, just numbers. I stared at the check for a long time before depositing it, not because I felt guilty, because I felt tired. There is a strange emptiness that comes after finally defending yourself. People think revenge feels powerful. They imagine satisfaction, victory, closure, but the truth is much quieter than that. It feels like standing in the middle of a room after a storm and realizing the house is still standing, but nothing inside it belongs where it used to. I went back to work, back to steel calculations, back to load distributions and stress tolerances and architectural meetings where nobody cared about family drama. And honestly, that saved me. Buildings are honest. If a beam cannot carry weight, it fails. If a foundation cracks, you see it eventually. Structures do not pretend. People do. 2 months after the Father's Day dinner, I got another call from Aunt Patris. Her voice sounded exhausted. Your father sold truck 14, she said. Truck 14 was Harold's truck. The old white pickup with the faded Frell & Sons logo on the side. The truck my grandfather drove for almost 20 years. The bank required more collateral, Patris said quietly. I closed my eyes. For the first time since all this started, the weight hit me. Not the legal part, not the money, the history. My grandfather built that company with his hands. Every truck, every tool, every contract, every scar on the workshop floor. And now pieces of it were disappearing one by one. because my father had spent 14 years pretending the wrong daughter was expendable. A week later, Megan called me, not texted, called. I almost did not answer, but I did. Francis. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Yeah, long silence. Mom and Dad are fighting all the time. I said nothing. Dad barely sleeps anymore. Still silence. I didn't know about the agreement, she said quickly. I swear I didn't. I leaned back in my office chair and stared out the window. Rain streaked the glass. Cars crawled through downtown traffic below. You knew enough, I said finally. She started crying. Real crying, not dramatic crying, not performance, the ugly kind people do when nobody is watching. I didn't think, I know. That was the problem. Nobody thought, not when they excluded me from photos, not when they forgot holidays, not when they pushed me out of the company, not when they made group chats without me. Nobody thought about what it feels like to slowly disappear inside your own family. I was 8 when Mom married your dad, Megan whispered. I just wanted him to love me. I closed my eyes, and there it was again, that flicker. That dangerous little spark called empathy, because she had been a child once, and children build themselves around whatever love they can reach. The real failure was not Megan, it was my father. He was the adult, the parent. The beam that was supposed to hold everything up. And instead, he shifted all the weight onto one child while carrying the other. Eventually, something was always going to crack. I don't hate you, I told her. She started crying harder. But I can't keep paying for choices I didn't make. She whispered, I know. That was the first honest thing anyone in that house had said to me in years. By October, Frell & Sons Construction lost 2 major contracts. Not because of me, because the company had been struggling for years and nobody wanted to admit it. Harold used to run operations carefully, every dollar tracked, every estimate double-checked. My father ran the company emotionally. Like optimism could replace planning, it could not. The buyout exposed weaknesses that were already there. Weaknesses everyone ignored because pretending is easier than fixing. One evening in November, I came home from work and found a package outside my condo door. No return address. Inside was a small cedar box. I recognized it immediately. Harold made those boxes by hand every Christmas. Tiny brass hinges, smooth corners, the smell of cedar oil. Inside the box was a folded piece of paper. One sentence. Your grandfather was right about you. No signature, but I knew my father's handwriting. I sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour holding that note. Not crying, not angry, just still. Because after 14 years of silence, one sentence from him still had the power to land somewhere deep inside me. That is the complicated thing about parents. Even when they fail you, even when they break your heart, part of you keeps waiting for them to finally see you. Christmas came. For the first time in my life, I did not go to the house on Maple Lane. No invitation came. I did not expect one. Instead, Aunt Patris came to my condo. We made Harold's casserole, watched old movies, drank coffee. At one point, she looked around my small apartment and smiled. Peaceful here, she said, and she was right. Small, but peaceful, no pretending, no performances, no fighting for a seat at the table, just peace. In January, the final payment arrived. $120,000. The buyout was complete. Legally, officially, permanently, I was no longer part owner of Frell & Sons Construction. I drove to Ridgewood that weekend. Not to see my father, not for closure, for Harold. The cemetery sat on a hill behind First Baptist Church. Snow covered the ground in thin, uneven patches. The air smelled sharp and cold. I stood in front of Harold's headstone with my hands in my coat pockets. Harold James Frell, 1924-2019. Beloved father, builder, friend, builder. I smiled at that, because that was what he really was. Not just of houses, of people. He built me carefully, patiently, with intention, even knowing one day I might need the strength to stand alone. You tried to warn him, I said quietly. Wind moved through the trees. I tried too. And somehow saying that out loud mattered, because for years I carried guilt. Like maybe I had not been patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough. But there comes a point where forgiveness stops being grace and starts becoming permission. And I was done giving people permission to erase me. As I walked back toward my car, my phone buzzed. A text from my father, 3 words, I miss you. I stared at the screen. Snow crunched beneath my shoes. For a moment, I was 8 years old again, standing on plywood while my father pointed at a steel beam and told me I would be the thing that holds everything up. Then I remembered something else. Beams are not supposed to carry weight forever without support. Eventually they crack, eventually they fail, and sometimes surviving means stepping out from under the structure before it collapses on top of you. I typed a response. I love you, Dad, but I deserved better. Then I put my phone in my pocket, started the engine, and drove home, not to Maple Lane, not to the house with the adoption certificate above the mantel. home, to the life I built myself. The truth is, people think family is something automatic. Blood, shared names, holiday photos. But family is not who keeps your seat warm while quietly pushing you away from the table. Family is who notices when your chair is missing. And if they do not notice, if they can celebrate while you disappear inch by inch, then leaving is not betrayal, it is survival. That was the hardest thing I ever learned, and also the thing that finally set me free.